Okay, there we go. Welcome to everyone. My name is Deborah Sloan, and I'm the president of the Northwest Ceramics Foundation, and I'd like to welcome you all to our presentation by Dr. Julie Bartholomew. But first, there's a few things to chat about. The Northwest Ceramics Foundation is grateful for and acknowledges it operates on land that is the unceded, shared, traditional territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations. We stand in solidarity with all communities marginalized due to race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, or age, and commit ourselves to opposing racism in all its forms. For those currently not on our mailing list, please join our website, www.nwcf.ca. At the top of every page, there's a blue button. And you click on that, it will take you to the form to sign up to receive our emails, and you'll hear about our upcoming events. All of our talks are free and they're open to all, but all Zoom talks require registration. For those of you in the Greater Vancouver region, we encourage you to check out a number of ceramic shows, including Fired Identity, Greater Vancouver Chinese Canadian Artists in Clay at Kwantlen University in Surrey on till June 26th. The Fraser Valley Potters Guild, their 70th juried show at Deer Lake Gallery in Burnaby until April 9th. And decades of friendship and collaboration with Linda Doherty, Sharon Ray, and Jay McLennan at the Craft Council of BC on Granville Island until March 31. We're fortunate to have so many great exhibitions featuring ceramics at this moment, and we just finished up a big Canadian clay symposium. So we hope you get the chance to take in these exhibitions. Our next speaker will be another Australian, Peter Wilson. We had to reschedule his talk due to an unfortunate accident, but we hope to bring him to you at the end of May, so please stay tuned. For the duration of this talk, will you please mute yourselves and turn off your videos? That way it'll improve our transmission. So please turn off your videos, everyone. At the end of the talk, we'll have a discussion, so you can turn your videos back on and so forth. You can type questions into the chat function at any time to be recognized during discussion period. This talk is being recorded and it'll be posted on our website where you can find it and other talks there. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for this afternoon, Dr. Julie Bartholomew. For over 3 decades, Australian Julie Bartholomew has engaged with projects that push the boundaries of materiality and craft processes through her issues-focused sculptures, reinventing ceramics and glass in a contemporary context. She has explored communication technologies, global consumerism, penal identity, and projects that traverse the perimeters of arts, science, and environmentalism. Recent projects explore the impact of climate change and the effect it is having on the polar regions. Julie has exhibited in Australia and abroad, including Ying Ceramics Museum, Taiwan. I don't know how to say this, but Teoxuan, Yingwei can correct me. Teoxuan Ceramics Museum in Jingdezhen, Doland Museum in Modern Art, Shanghai, Barron Contemporary in Miami and New York, Shepperton Art Museum, Seattle Art Museum, Victoria and Saba Gallery in Sydney. Julie has participated in numerous international art residencies and has been the recipient of 5 Creative Australian grants. Her work is in many collections, including the National Gallery of Australia and the National Museum of Australia. We are very excited to be presenting our first speaker live from Australia. Please turn off your videos if you can, and please welcome Dr. Julie Bartholomew. There you go, Julie.
So I'm just working out how to. Hi, everybody. I'm just working out how to share. Um, oh, you are. So that should be screen sharing.
Yeah,
Is
good.
that correct?
Yep,
Yeah. Are we there?
There
yeah,
you go.
we're there now.
Yep. Oh, good. That's fantastic. Oh, excellent. Oh, thank you for inviting me to be part of this event. I'm very privileged and happy to be presenting today. I'd also like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri First Nations people of the ACT in Canberra, where I'm now living. I am an artist, educator, and writer, and lived in Sydney for over 35 years. And this was my backyard for a long time, the wonderful Bondi Beach. And it was a fantastic sort of place to live, but I was always overseas doing residencies and never really settled down. So now at the age of getting on to 69, I've decided to settle. And I've moved to Canberra where I now have a house and studio, which is not yet functioning, but I'm on my way. So that's my present location. My talk is titled Marking Time. This is because my art practice engages with cultural and social debates that are relevant at the time of the creation of the artwork. I adopt a broad range of techniques of making. These include throwing, hand building, and the industrial technologies of mold making and slip casting. One of my first projects, and we're going back to 2000 here, that's 26 years ago, was my graduate master's exhibition, and it was called Spin. It was a major show. It was my first major show in Sydney. At the turn of the century, communication technologies, specifically digital technology and the internet, were important forces in society. Many artists were asking the question, what does it mean to be human in a rapidly changing technological world? Particularly as the human body is mediated by the artificial. And by that, I mean from an iPhone, ATM to plastic surgery and prosthetics. So Spin is a project that responded to this question and engaged in relationships between human beings and communication technologies, past and present. This exhibition explores the idea of humans creating the technology, but the technology recreating us. So I developed a series of porcelain objects that showed the marks of the user in order to explore that interconnection between the body and our objects of technology, both old and new. Because even the first inventions, going back to the writing quill, changed the way we act and think in the world. This is a piece that I titled Web Page. This was a very ambitious piece based on an old-fashioned gramophone. But if you look closely, you'll see that the gramophone is also morphed with my body parts, my ear, my finger, my long nail, which becomes the stylus for the vinyl record. And the same idea continued with this piece, which I titled Talkback Radio. And the next one, Spinning Tales, which consists of very thinly cast bone china slabs that became pages of a book. And you can imagine turning the pages of this piece, and as I've imagined that I've imprinted my finger in the top right edge of the page. So in every piece see in this show, there's a body mark or a trace of human interaction. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's a zoetrope, one of the first animation pieces of technology where you'd spin through the little window and see the repetition and change of imagery with the spinning motion. In this particular one, I decided to use Escher's eye winking back at you because Escher, the Dutch artist from the late 19th century, was one of the first to be considered the father of animation. And the last major piece in this particular project is called Spinning the Avatar. It's a large immersive work. As the object spins or the avatar spins, digital imagery rotates across the wall of the gallery. This installation challenges the boundaries between the body and technology, nature, culture, the real and the artificial. So it's a bit hard to see scale with these images, but the avatar was about 2 meters across and 3 meters high. And when you walked into the darkened space, your body movement as you navigated the piece would trigger its movement. And from the piece itself would be projected images of me looking into the so-called virtual space from the outside of a computer. So it was playing with that idea of confounding and confusing the distinctions between the real and the virtual, which was really popular at that time at the turn of the century. The next project was actually part of my PhD studies and titled Wrapped and Branded, Investigating Consumerism and Female Identity. The porcelain, still working in porcelain at this stage, and mainly casting objects from life, but cutting, distorting, morphing, and manipulating those objects to create a different meaning. These objects in particular that I'm going to show you satirize elite branding and the impulse to enhance identity by adorning the body with expensive products. So here we've got I am Louis Vuitton. So the idea here is, the desire to wrap your body in elite branding has been pushed to an extreme, to the point where body parts become part of the object itself, that you're investing your identity and self in these objects of consumerism. So it was a very tongue-in-cheek series of work. I am Coco, a reference to Coco Chanel's product line. Here you see perfume bottles that have been stuffed with body parts, mainly my body parts, fingers, ears, toes. A little bit gruesome in a way, but at the same time, they're quite beautiful because they've been refined to be positioned within the context of that pristine veneer of consumerism. The objects, these particular objects and the others, have sort of contradictory forces. They are both enticing and confronting. Wrinkled, imperfect bodies cast from life counterpoint the very smooth and glossy veneer of consumerism. And these are my cast arms at the time, which is going back a few years. I think I'm a lot more wrinkly now. And part of this project, an extension of this project, was a digital ceramic object installation called Transitional Bodies. And this project came out of a residency in Tokyo. What I noticed there were the dominant Western ideologies, particularly seen in Tokyo's hyper-consumer environment. and their gigantic billboards displayed Caucasian and Eurasian models that are generally employed to sell foreign brands like Louis Vuitton. And you can see one of the huge posters on the left. But at the same time, what I discovered through my interviews and meetings with women from a younger generation was Tokyo's subculture, which challenged the dominant visual language of consumerism by misusing global language, manipulating brand logos, layering contradictory fashion styles, which is what you can see on the right here. It's a combination of the traditional Japanese kimono and British punk, and also combining, all of those styles to create an unconventional body presentation, which expressed the individuality of these young girls. So as a response to this research, because it was part of my PhD studies, I developed the installation called Transitional Bodies. It consists of objects and digital imagery. There are 4 life-size figures sitting with closed eyes as if traversing the subways of Tokyo. And if you've been to Tokyo, you spend most of your day on those subways. It's a very extensive and complex system. And the locals spend many hours going to and from work on the subway system in Tokyo. These transitory porcelain bodies are metaphorical. They're in between train stops. They're in between sleeping and waking, fixity and action. They embody references to homogeneity, but also affirm the distinctness of the individual bodies, which they are cast from life. And this is just a close-up of one of the figures with the imagery rolling over her white body. And these are the figures without the imagery. So you can see that they're all very distinct, individually cast, and quite detailed and different. Not the way that consumer culture wants us to think of ourselves. And I just want to acknowledge the absolutely wonderful models that I had for this project, because truly to be able to withstand the process of casting the full body over what can be 2 days, not continuously, of course, but it feels like that. You need to be quite resilient and tough to withstand the casting process. It's a tough process. So the next project that came from that one and just developed in a different direction was Global Markings, and it navigates global consumerism and identity. But this took me to Asia, back to Asia, and it has a very strong Asian focus. I have a long-term interest in Asian cultures since first visiting Japan at the age of 15, and then traveling through China with my 83-year-old grandmother in 1987, a time of billions of bicycles, few skyscrapers, and the Chinese were still amazingly wearing green Mao Zedong uniforms in the streets. My grandmother was also a potter. She started learning how to throw on a Shimpo wheel at the age of 70, and she continued right through to when she passed. So we were very interested in ceramics. So we were a great team traveling through China in 1987. I returned to China in 2007, and I found a completely different country, one that was racing to the future at an accelerating rate. This created a really sort of obvious coexistence of traditional culture and contemporary life. Now, these photographs I took in a park in Beijing, close to where I was living for 4 months during an artist residency. And you can see these wonderful cultural activities were very much a part of community life. But at the same time, you had this happening in shopping malls and on the streets of Beijing. There were artists at the time, contemporary Chinese artists, around 2007 that were already responding to the cultural contradictions and the clashing together of past and present, often expressed as critical commentary. And Ai Weiwei came a little bit after this, but some of his predecessors were people like Li Xiaohong, who created this piece titled Age of Consumerism. It's quite extraordinary. It consists of old shards from the porcelain capital of Jingdezhen in China that have been sewn together into contemporary clothing. Qing and Ming Dynasty shards from real ceramics, from real ancient ceramics. He created this fashion parade with models when I was there in Red Gate Gallery, which is a very famous gallery in Beijing set up by an Australian actually in the late 80s and continues today, but in a different iteration. But I witnessed this parade and I felt so sorry for the model because you can imagine the weight of this dress. It was extraordinary. And she was really struggling to remain elegant. These works reflect China's social and cultural mood at the beginning of the 21st century. Within a short time, China experienced rapid urbanization and exposure to global values and branding. So my response to this world was to combine the past and present by referencing women's accessories from the Qing dynasty and morphing those references with Prada, Armani, and Chanel global branding, which you can see here. This series of work is titled Qing Chanel. That one's in the Wollongong Gallery and it's on permanent display for any Australians who want to see it. Louis Vuitton dynasty. Nike dynasty. And this is where those works were made. And in 2007, that's when I discovered this extraordinary city called Jingdezhen, which is the capital of porcelain in China, but really the world. And I've been going there now since 2007 every year, except the COVID years, right up to the present. At one stage, I had a gallery, and you can see the door of not a gallery, a studio. You can see the door of my studio in the background. And on the right, in those days when we first started, all of the firings were raw glazing. And, big works, small works, you sprayed onto dry, raw porcelain and fired only once in communal kilns. And in a way, that's quite environmentally friendly, though there are other practices in China that aren't so, but this in particular is quite an interesting way of conserving energy. And I still continue to use this technique of raw glazing. So that's where those pieces were made. But my work has continued to be made in China over the years. Around 2010, my work shifted quite dramatically. I started to respond to environmental issues. I sort of resituated my practice within the local context of Australia while drawing on China's rich ceramic traditions. This series was really about discovering, and I was unaware of it previously, that the loss of birds and flowers in Australia is faster than other developed countries due to the continent's isolation and then sudden exposure to pests and human intervention after colonisation. This is a paradise parrot, last seen in 1937. And although this is porcelain, when I brought some of the birds back to my studio in Australia, I used just earthenware glazes to create these beautiful colours by layering them and firing them to 1120. So it's a combination of hi-fi porcelain and earthenware glazes. If you look closely, you can see writing on the branches. And this writing is a narrative about the life of this particular extinct paradise parrot and the conditions and the climate that caused the conditions that caused their extinction or their endangered status. The project expressed these particular objects expressed a tension between the colourful and vibrant life force of the natural world through the bird's colours, but within the context of the bleached sterility of intervention and extinction, which is expressed through these very stark white branches. This is the swift parrot, which is endemic to a little island off the south of Australia called Tasmania. At the time of making this, there were 600 swift parrots left in Tasmania, but now there are over 1,000 because of conservation efforts from the Tasmanian government, which is really good news. This is me in the studio making the work, and it gives you an idea of the scale of these pieces. They were assembled from separate sections that were cast with super white porcelain and interlinked together to create the installation. The next project really shifted my focus to endangered Australian flowers. With this particular project, it was called Rarely Seen, and it was a representation of 120 distinct, different endangered Australian flowers. So each flower was handmade, not all of them by me, because there were some that were just incredibly difficult to hand form. And luckily I was working in Jindajan, where there's a tradition of flower making and some wonderful flower makers. And the person that I worked with, her name was Tangling. She was particularly open to building flowers that weren't peonies or Chinese flowers. So she was very experimental about the way she put these together. She was a great person to work with. So here you see one of her pieces, which is actually a Phillip Island hibiscus. And these flowers are positioned, most of them were built from photographs or drawings that I managed to discover in different places back home. And they reference, these rarely seen species. And they're placed, I've deliberately placed them within chemistry petri dishes with a very strong copper red glaze, suggesting a connection with the field of science that both confines and defines the flower's precarious existence. And these beautiful copper glazes are just wonderful, and they have to be fired in a certain way. They're quite volatile glazes. For those that are familiar with copper reds, you lose the redness quite easily depending on where they're positioned in the kiln. A project that followed Rarely Seen was Subversive Botanica. It was a very ambiguous interplay between weapon-like scientific equipment and endangered species of Australian flowers, suggesting protection, destruction, preservation, and demise. Scientific development protects and prolongs the existence of threatened plants, but it also has been responsible for the demise of many species through harmful chemical exposure. The disconcerting reference to guns anticipates the possibility of impending environmental disaster. But these works, sort of on a lighter, more positive note, these works were actually a gesture taken from a 1967 Vietnam War protest when protesters would place a daisy or a flower in the barrel of a gun. And I use that as a source of inspiration and research for this particular project. Now, a project that followed on from here, and this is around sort of 2016, was called Climate Scrolls Antarctic Ice Memory. It consisted of ice cores that provide evidence of climate change and global warming. I was really intrigued by this process of ice core extraction. Australian scientists, go down to the Antarctic and they extract these cores from different glaciers. And this particular core that I based my work on was from a place called Law Dome in Antarctica. And this is the professor that I worked with on this project. He provided me with the data and the information from the core that you see him extracting there. And I used that information to create my artwork. This is the drill that was actually used to extract the core that I based my research on. And my artwork is actually alongside this drill in the National Museum of Australia. They bought it because they were given the drill. So it was quite a serendipitous situation. And they're both situated in the environment history section of the museum. And these are the works that I created. These involve my first venture into glass, and it's a combination of glass and porcelain. And I loved the idea of working with glass because it captures that ice-like appearance of glaciers from which these cores are extracted. Glass is also transparent and it contains bubbles. I think you can see a closer view of the bubbles here. These bubbles in glass refer to real bubbles that are trapped in real ice cores. The air inside the bubbles is extracted by scientists and tested for carbon dioxide levels. These tests provide evidence of rising carbon dioxide levels in the Earth's atmosphere that contributes to the devastation caused by climate change and global warming. And this gives you an idea of scale. The thrown porcelain columns, interspersed with cast glass, are glazed with horizontal striations. Each band refers to the layers of annual snowfall in real ice cores. Each band is a year of snowfall that's compressed as ice. Therefore, the ice cores can be dated back, and some of the one that I based my research on was dated back 10,000 years. But some of the ice cores that the Americans are pulling out of glaciers are millions of years old. So these scientists are able to compare the condition of the climate in past times to the present. So ice cores are an incredible way of reading climate history. This is the Canberra Glassworks. So I now live in Canberra, so it's very, very handy for me to have this amazing institution, which is one of the best glassworks in the world, at my doorstep. So I'm continuing to work in glass. the casting that I did for the Ice Core project was actually quite connected to ceramics because I've been making molds and slip casting for a long time. It wasn't a huge leap for me to move into making molds for glass, except that the molds are actually fireable and you don't fire them very high. You fire glass to around 850. But the difficulty of glass is that you've got to cold work them. So with ceramics, you might do a bit of sanding once, but with sort of cast glass, as you can see, the one on the right, it's quite rough the way it comes out at the sides. You've got to grind all of that off, and you're grinding, at least 4 or 5 times on big machines. It's really tough work. So I'd certainly admire glass makers. A project that I pursued when I had a residency in Taoxishuan in Jindajiang, back to China. I had a show in their big Taoxishuan museum called Melt. China, this is about 2019. This exhibition is a response to the disappearance of glaciers in polar regions. Chinese philosophy and culture emphasizes the significance of mountains. China's sacred mountains are pathways to greater consciousness and the heavens. Melt, this exhibition, also suggests the value of ice mountains. They are also sacred because glaciers preserve a record of past climates, as I was saying earlier, in layers of ice. By analysing the ice, scientists are able to reconstruct the Earth's past climate. This research paves way for a better understanding of climate change and global warming. So with this big exhibition, it was quite an ambitious project. I produced a wall piece. And what you see there is a graph of a glacier in Svalbard near Norway, and its different stages. It's a receding glacier and the different stages of its melt, and the ephemeral addition of dripped slip cast body that pulls on the floor of the gallery, and over about a week it starts to crack. This installation, these are the ceramic objects that were leading towards the wall piece. And each of these objects are solid porcelain pieces that have been cut and thrown and wet and shaped into iceberg-like shapes. So these represent different forms of icebergs from real life that I've sourced, and also lots of different beautiful celadon glazes from blue right through to a deep green, because China is the country for celadon glazes, and there were plenty there at my fingertips. And here you see the slight difference in glaze surface and color, but the pieces themselves are actually solid porcelain. And a close-up of the luscious glaze and the textured raw porcelain surface. This is an example of scale. So I was working with big bags of porcelain, developing lots of muscles during this residency, throwing the clay on the floor, cutting it, stretching it, distorting it, to create these iceberg-like shapes. It was a really fun project. I loved it, but hard work. Then the next project, which is taking us more towards recent times, was called Habitat, and still very focused on responding to environmental issues. Habitat is a more current project concerned with the global decline of honeybee populations. They have been severely impacted, but particularly in Australia and native bees as well, due to the 2019 and 20 Black Summer fires, which were horrendous. They were super fires that burnt across 2 states. And I'm sure you heard about this and you've had your own fires in your world as well. The loss of billions of insects is poorly understood, and its consequences for humans are quite dire because bees are major pollinators and sustain diversity. This is a quite a famous shot of the Black Summer fires with the kangaroos in the foreground. But just a quick word about the fires. The research, the investigation of the fire has shown that it was caused by conditions that were created by climate change. So that's something that we've learnt, and we're looking at different sort of fire prevention practices, and particularly First Nations practices, in order to stop something like this happening again. I used to be a beekeeper, a really fabulous activity. I loved it. And here I am beekeeping at Barrel Beekeeping. But this was towards my project, which involved creating functional clay beehives with terracotta clay, but they were also sculptures. These forms are inspired by the exquisite architecture of bee honeycombing in nature, often seen hanging from branches of trees. And this is sort of a counterpoint to the usual box-like hives that you see bees being kept in. Habitat aims to bring greater visual focus to the global decline of bees. And even though this project has finished, I'm still tuning into it in different ways. Like, for instance, in May, I'm giving a workshop on how to build native hotels. So it's a project that certainly has legs. This is one of my sculptural beehives. I used terracotta slip to seal the surface. And although they're sculptural, they're functioning. So I had to consider ventilation, insulation, how the bees actually entered the hive and exited the hive, the size of the opening. So it was very sort of technical and architectural as well. This particular hive was populated at Barrel Beekeeping over 4 months. And then I evacuated the bees in a very gentle way. I encouraged them to leave because I wanted to show this piece at Craft and Design Canberra for an exhibition with one of my earlier students, Mihaela Hill. And here are some of the sculptural pieces that accompanied the actual beehives. And a close-up. You've got to love a honey glaze. They're so luscious and seductive and make you hungry. I was also invited at the end of 2003 to India to make some sculptural beehives in Baroda, which is a really extraordinary academic centre with many universities and a great interest in the arts and particularly ceramics. So here I am in the middle there, and this is just a lunchtime, like an average lunchtime. Everybody visits and we all eat together. And this is the hive that I built in Baroda in India. And you can see it hasn't been fired at this stage. And this was a raw firing, again, using that technique that I picked up in China long ago, using terra sigillata, which is a very sort of fine slip in between a slip and a glaze, and seals the surface of the structure. Evanescence was my latest solo show at Sabia in Sydney, Sabia Gallery. It continues an engagement with the transience and fragility of glaciers as they melt due to global warming. I'm still working across those two materials of glass and porcelain, as I said earlier. This is, I started working with cast glass, but I'm now working with glass blowers at the Glassworks. This is something I won't do because it's just technically, I just can't imagine myself blowing glass. I think it's best to leave it to the experts. So we work together, and here you have two gaffers, Nettie and Meg, creating a component for my sculptures. And this is me doing a Canberra Glassworks residency. And what you see me doing there is creating a prototype for the glass that I'm going to cast later to be inserted between the two ceramic sections. So it's quite a precise and fickle way of working. You have to be very exact. And these are the results of that residency. This is called Thwaites Glacial Series. Thwaites Glacier is a receding glacier in the Antarctic, and so are the others of this series. Denham Glacier Series. And you can see that the beauty of glass and that beautiful iridescent blue combined with the Chinese sort of blue and white brushwork on porcelain. And Pine Island Glacial Series. This piece is titled Glacial Motion is Stillness. And that's the piece that I was working on that you saw me creating in the studio just earlier. But I've swung it around the other side so you can see a cast pink slice or slither of glass that's been inserted between the two porcelain pieces. This work is titled Glacial Melt. And the close-up shows you the two together, and that's exactly what the glass blowers were blowing in the hot shop. This piece of glass, solid blue glass, that sits over the ceramics. But of course, you can't place hot blown glass on ceramics because it's going to crack the ceramic sculpture. So what I have to do is create a a plaster version of my porcelain sculpture for the gaffers to blow onto. And the glass and the plasters reinforced and separated by graphite. So it's quite an involved process. This is the last piece or series that I've been working on just recently called Glacial Tear from Deep Time. It is a blend of beauty and loss. The blue crystal glass tear nestles on a white porcelain ice shelf, resembling a glacial fragment that stretches back into deep time. The haptic qualities of glass and porcelain seek to elicit an immersive bodily response from the viewer, reminding us of our interconnectedness to the material world, while reflecting on human actions and the consequences of climate change. So in a way, I would call my environmental work a quite sort of activism. It's not sort of in-your-face activism. It's using my areas that are familiar with me, my creative instincts and processes to make a statement about the state of the world, but in a very sort of gentle, subtle way. So this is where I am now, and finally heading to a polar region in July to the Arctic Circle. And hopefully I'll get there. Considering what's happening in the world, I'm hoping I'm going to make it, but it's all ready to go. So that is the end of my talk. Thank you to everybody. And these are just acknowledging the photographers that were part of my presentation.
Wow, such involved work. Now, have people put some questions into the chat? I'm just looking. Can you see, Jen? Can anyone hear?
Maybe we can invite some questions. I see Amy popped one in there, or a comment for you. The glacier pieces are truly beautiful. It is so difficult to combine glass and ceramics.
It is. Have you tried it?
No, so the plaster must get quite cooked.
It does, and it starts to fragment and shatter after a period of time. So you can't use the casts
Yeah,
for very long. For you can't really do multiple works with them.
right, right. But now, a lot of your work is very, very involved, and it's a lot of pieces gathered together to make a story. One of your challenges must be finding gallery space and exhibition space to show these pieces. How do you manage that?
Oh, that's exactly right. And it's even more difficult now because so many galleries have not survived COVID. It is quite a challenge. I mean, luckily I have a gallery in Sydney that represents me, and I've shown most of these projects since the China work in that gallery in either group shows and a couple of solo shows. But it's really very difficult. You've got to work hard
Yeah,
putting in applications. And I find a good way of doing it now is to work with others that have similar ideas and concerns. So there are two other artists that are also interested in polar regions. My friends Leah and Emma, and the three of us together have managed a gallery in Sydney, but it's 2028. It's a long way off. So we're very happy about that.
those are very involved shows. I mean, they've got a lot of presentation and mounting, and so I'm not surprised 2028, to get them going.
The further away, the better at the moment.
So when you
But
say,
the interesting thing about that question is that, sorry,
go on.
is when you travel to Asian countries to do residencies, it's very different to maybe Canada and Australia. There are ceramic galleries and museums everywhere and residency programs everywhere. So there's a greater opportunity to make and show in Asia than there is in Australia.
Have you very often been able to leave your work in Jingdezhen for an exhibition?
Yeah, I have done that a few times.
And then you're shipping back and forth to Australia as well.
Yeah, that may not continue with the situation at the moment. So, yes, I have been doing that for a long time, and it's generally been reasonable in terms of costs. But of course, this is going to change.
Yeah. Well, that's so interesting. Now I haven't, has anybody else, Jen, do you see any other questions? Ah, here's from Juliana Shibata. Do you have any advice about how to balance one's research? Oops, I lost it. Jen, can you find it?
Do you have any advice about how to balance one's research with studio production? I often find that production is valued because it's readily seen, while research can take time away from the studio, but it's also important to one's practice.
Oh, that is a very difficult juggle. Uh, but I mean, the thing is, you can often find intersections between your research and sculptural installation work and a production line. At the moment, I'm developing a production line, and the colors and glazes are very similar to my ice cores. So I don't need to research the glazes for the production line. They've already been researched for my sculptural work. So I think that the secret is to find those interconnections between your production line and your work that's more oriented towards research and takes a lot of time and energy.
Yeah.
Deb, could we stop screen sharing? Because the way it is now, if there's people who have questions, you can't see them.
Okay, I can see, just found the last one, I think, but yeah, let me see now. I'll stop screen sharing.
Because there could be people with questions, but we can't see them.
Okay.
Will I stop too?
Yes, if you stop screen sharing,
Okay.
yes.
There you go.
Then
I'm
you can
off
go
it.
to the gallery and you'll see everybody.
Okay. I'm trying to hide self-view.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. So are there any more questions? Can you see any more? I think
We had wanted to ask Julie a question about sculpture because it was something we're thinking a lot about with the Northwest Ceramics Foundation. How do you distinguish sculpture, ceramic sculpture, as opposed to, say, sculptural functional works and things? And just thought if you had any ideas. All of your work appears to be sculptural, but I don't know if you make any functional work. And in a way, the bees were probably
Yeah, I
the
do, and it's a
closest to
very
sculptural functional work.
Yeah, I mean, sculptural ceramics can also be functional, and this goes back to 3000 BC with beautiful German Japanese ceramics. It's sculptural, but it was also used like a backpack to carry grain and oil from place to place because the German people were nomadic. So yeah, I think you can do both. But there's always a point at which you just step over the line and it becomes sculpture, non-functional, and its purpose is to create meaning and narrative. Well, narratives. The narrative and the meaning becomes more important. The form and the aesthetics become more important than the function, and that's when it starts to change.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll always remember Paul Matthew's writing, and he said in one of his articles, he said, ceramic sculpture is different from sculpture, say, in marble and glass and the rest of the visual arts, because ceramic sculpture is hollow. I mean, to a point, it has to be hollow in order to be able to fire. But actually, my melt pieces did challenge that one because most of those melt iceberg shapes are solid porcelain. But I love his writing, and he's always got so many wonderful ideas.
Yeah, he's a wonderful writer. Okay, well that's a good that's interesting to have another definition. And here's a person, Enrique Schumacher Maldonado. Maldonado. I don't have any questions. Just wanted to say it was a massive pleasure witnessing your work in this presentation. Love all the unique and interesting concepts from throughout all the art projects shown. Thank you very much. That's wonderful. I mean, you covered a huge amount.
Oh, thank you.
You covered a huge amount of work that you have done in a very short time for us. So thank you. And working with porcelain.
My pleasure, and thank you very much to the North. Yeah, go on.
Oh no, just saying working with porcelain must have been an additional fantastic challenge. And Jing Zen seems to be the right place to have done it.
Yeah, porcelain is a very prima donna clay. Difficult.
So if there are no more questions or comments, I think we can let you go. And thank you so much. You're getting.
I'd like to thank the Northwest West Ceramics Foundation for inviting me. It's been an absolute pleasure. So thank you to you all and all the work that you've contributed towards this talk.
Well, you're most welcome, and it's an adventure thinking that we're able to communicate from so far away. It's fantastic. So thank you, everyone, and I will shut down the meeting. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.